Hey, everybody, welcome to Rob Nelson Live. Wow. So, thousands and thousands of people out on the streets across America protesting, thousands everywhere. And barely a word about COVID-19. I mean, a little bit, but barely a word. Did we just create a massive magnifier? Did we just have a trigger effect? One of those events that's going to launch us into a new wave of overcrowded hospitals, the pandemic, and the horrible outcome that we tried to avoid 3 months ago? I don't think so. In fact, the media barely talks about it because COVID-19 has officially been canceled. I'm Rob Nelson. It's Rob Nelson Live.
Meet Rob Nelson, talk show host.
Because you got the 70s thing going there.
My name's Rob Nelson. I used to have a talk show on Fox, a show on Fox News, but news in America is so produced. I don't care if you think it's left, right, center, fake.
You passed tougher legislation to deal with the paparazzi after what happened with you and your family.
I think it's very important that we focus on rebuilding.
All right, welcome back. Welcome to the show. Hey, Bruce, how you doing?
Good, Rob. Thank you. Interesting day, interesting week.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week. Crazy week, right? And we were out in those protests. Well, you weren't. You were in the safety of your, cubicle over there. But I was out in them with the masses. And I don't know about you, but haven't heard a thing really about it in the news. It's been pretty quiet. You'd think it never happened, the COVID thing. I mean, it's amazing that a story can drop so fast. Like, it's in the news, but it used to be the top 20 stories in every news, and now it's like 8, 9.
What is that thing again? COVID, Corona? It kind of sounds familiar. I just don't really remember it.
Yeah. It's a beer.
Yeah,
all right,
exactly.
Well, look. So let's let everybody know you can get on this. You can be part of the conversation. It's our Wednesday open mic. Like to have feedback, comments, the whole thing, and get a kind of real conversation going. On Friday, we're going to have moving the time a little bit to 6:30 Pacific time. We're going to have Freeway Ricky Ross on, who is just going to be an awesome guest. For those of you who don't know, you can Google him. But Freeway Ricky Ross has had a long history in both. He was originally a drug dealer, went to prison, had a long history in the history of sort of America's cocaine crisis and the Iran-Contra back in the Reagan years, and also in criminal justice reform, has been a really outspoken voice, doing a number of really amazing things, has an incredible personal story and years of perspective on Black Lives Matter, on black and white justice, on police reform, and on drugs and legalization, the whole thing. It's going to be a great conversation Friday. I know Bruce is dying to get into it. So let's hit the monologue. Well, here's the deal. Last week, in the middle of the protests, the head of the Center for Disease Prevention and Control for the U.S. said this at Senate testimony hearings. He was showing pictures of people out on Memorial Day weekend, people at the beaches, people at Lake Ozark, which was one of the famous ones where there were thousands of people gathered on the beaches and at the lakes. And he said, we're very concerned that our public health message isn't resonating. The pictures the chairwoman in the Senate hearings, the chairwoman showed me are great examples of serious problems. Okay. That was last week. But here's the thing. You have not heard hardly anyone say much about the thousands of protesters out in protesting for George Floyd. Now, this is not me judging whether people should be out protesting. I was in favor of people being out way sooner, period. I was in favor of people being out before Memorial Day. I've been saying for a long time, I think we need to let people get back to life. But the media and even the government made a big deal out of the people going out for Memorial Day. It was a big deal. It was like, how selfish are you? You're going to go be a grandma killer, right? It's like kind of like, even if you don't get it, you're going to give it to somebody else. And the fact that the head of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention this past week, while all these protests were going on, pointed out that the pictures from Memorial Day were really unsettling, really disturbing. The message wasn't getting through. Why did the media and so many politicians go silent when it came to the George Floyd protests? Well, I mean, the reason. because they were afraid to say anything bad about the protests. But again, you can say the protests are justified, and you can still say this is going to create a massive public health threat. You did see some people in a limited way, in some limited media coverage, saying, hey, we're not sure what this will do, or this might not be a good thing. Remember, with Memorial Day, it was a bad thing. With Memorial Day, with the states opening early, this was going to lead to mass murder. And even today, even yesterday, CNN had an article about the states that opened early and how they're seeing numbers are going up. And CNN's quick to point out it's not just new testing. Of course, the data is too soon to tell, they say, but peers numbers are going up in states that opened early, without a mention in that article about we just had, if opening your state early or Memorial Day get-togethers were going to be a mass casualty triggering event, the protests of the last week would be that times 100. And you had thousands of people in every major city packed together, shoulder to shoulder. You had thousands of police officers packed together, shoulder to shoulder. Most of the police officers don't even wear masks for tactical reasons. And people are yelling in each other's faces, and all those people are going home. So are they all granny killers? Why is it not okay to go out for Memorial Day? And again, you can say, well, one was a holiday, one was a cause. That's not the point. I'm not saying one was more important. I'm not saying going to protest George Floyd didn't have a bigger impact or meaning for people than going to the beach for Memorial Day. I'm saying if going to the beach for Memorial Day, if states wanting to get people back to work and get people out and back to a sense of normalcy to keep their economies going, if that somehow was likely to lead to a mass spread of the coronavirus, certainly thousands of people, however justified, going out and protesting in mass in every major city, shoulder to shoulder, would lead to that, like I said, multifold. And you could justifiably say, we know you want to protest, but you're going to kill everybody. If the point of not going out, not doing things was you have to be careful because you will start a mass casualty event. You will trigger the pandemic over again. You will trigger the outbreak we've been trying to avoid where millions of people will die. Well, that would still be true with the protests. And yet you barely heard that. You barely heard it. It was as if COVID had been canceled overnight. Now, again, think about it. If it's true that everybody was going to get it, if people went out, if states got back to normal, if people went out in the holidays, we were moving too fast, then this would be way worse. And whether you think it's justified or not to go protest, you would have a moral obligation to say, we get that you want to protest, but you're going to create a massive epidemic that's going to kill more people than you're going to save. And by the way, COVID has a disproportionately large impact on Black people compared to white people. They're not sure why. Same reason they're not sure why it affects O positives less than it does O blood types, less than A blood types. But they know that it has a disproportionate effect on Black people. There could be a number of reasons for that, but on Black people and Black communities, that's a fact, multiple times more than white people. So if that's the case, that's even worse because you're saying, hey, you're going to create an infection that's going to wipe out people. Well, they didn't say it for one of two reasons. One, it's not true, which leads you to why were they saying it about Memorial Day and all that? Because their modeling was wrong and they had to double down on their notion that we couldn't all go out? Or because it was true and they were scared to say it, which would, I don't know which is worse. Because if it was true and you were scared to say it, well, that's pretty bad because you are going to create a massive outbreak that will kill, according to the earlier modeling, if we'd done it, will kill millions of people. But I don't think it will. And that's part of what's frustrating in COVID being canceled. The media hyped for so long what was going on and had to double down on the fact that, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying COVID wasn't a real thing. It was. It's a disease we know very little about, a disease that's unpredictable. But the more information we find, the less you find people willing to acknowledge that perhaps they overreacted, or perhaps they were wrong, or perhaps it's time we can go back out. A perfect example of this is the other day, the World Health Organization had a press briefing, and one of the doctors at the press conference was talking about symptomatic versus asymptomatic transmission. Now, remember, Symptomatic transmission means you have the symptoms and you give them to somebody else. And you may have the disease, not yet have the symptoms, and could easily give it to someone else. You will get the symptoms in a day or two, but you could give it before that because it's already in your body. Asymptomatic carriers will never get symptoms. Their body will never, ever show any signs of having the disease. And they estimate that asymptomatic carriers could be anywhere from 20 to 60% of the population. Some people have said as high as 80. Most people are settling around 40 or 60. People could be asymptomatically carrying this disease. You'll get it. You'll never know you have it. You'll have zero symptoms, not mild symptoms, no symptoms. And the doctor at the press conference was asked about transmission and made very clear symptomatic transmission happens and can happen before the symptoms appear. But when it came to asymptomatic transmission, she said, well, there have been numerous studies and numerous tests, and we've looked at lots of data on this. And although we still have more to look at, transmission by asymptomatic carriers is, quote, very rare. Whoa. Now think about that, because remember, we've all been talking about how this disease is getting, how the symptomatic disease, how so many people will be asymptomatic. That would mean on the one hand, most people will get it and not even know they have it. But other people said, right, but they can give it to other people who would have it. Well, not if asymptomatic transmission is very rare. If asymptomatic transmission is very rare, it means if you don't have it or aren't going to get the symptoms of it, you're not going to give it to anyone. Immediately that hit the international news. And within a day, she had walked back her statements. Now, I read the actual transcript of the press conference, word for word. She didn't misspeak. She was very clear. She went through the studies. She was explicitly clear. Asymptomatic transmission from everything we've seen is very rare. Now, all of a sudden, the World Health Organization is saying, well, no, not necessarily very rare. I mean, our studies are limited and we have a lot more. Once again, like they have to double down on it. Even when science says something and they were backing it with science and it's the World Health Organization, all of a sudden everyone's backing off. COVID being canceled doesn't literally mean that the disease has gone away, but we live in the cancel culture era. And in that era, anything that is said that steps out of line, out of the mainstream mentality, out of whatever you can call it the mob mentality, you can call it the prevailing mentality, whatever it is, we will cancel you. We will shut you down. We will silence you. We will demand that you retract what you said, even if it's factual. We will make you walk it back. We will ask you to apologize. You will apologize. We will then ask you to apologize further. The apology usually has to come with I'm ashamed of myself and I should never have said what I said. And how could I have been so ignorant 5 years ago, 1 week ago, 20 years ago to say what I said or to think what I thought? I will never say, do, or think it again. I'm incredibly sorry. And then you're fired. I swear to God, it's like, it's bizarre. But that's the culture we're in right now. So let me run through some examples because I want us to think all about what we're benefiting, what we're getting in a cancel culture environment. All right. So Saturday, the founder of CrossFit. So there's a group called the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. They're a big modeling group, and they've done a lot of modeling on the coronavirus, and their data was pretty far off, but a lot of people use the modeling. And their modeling had a lot to do with many places keeping the lockdowns in place. The founder of CrossFit, like many others, thinks the lockdowns were a little too extreme, went too far, and that the numbers were wrong. Again, why it was okay to let tens and tens of thousands of people go protest. But they tweeted, the Institute, racism is a public health issue. And he tweeted, angry at the lockdowns and their metrics, like don't be going and using your metrics, because they were coming up with a metric for why racism is a health issue and how many lives it kills and all that, and said, stop doing your modeling to like try to model racism. And he then hashtagged Floyd19. Now you might think that's really inappropriate, Floyd19 instead of COVID-19. The founder of CrossFit came out afterward and said, I wasn't doing it to diss George Floyd, and I wasn't doing it because I don't believe in Black Lives Matter or even support it 100%. I was doing it because I was annoyed at this institute for their bad modeling and the damage it's doing, and now they were going to try to model racism. So I made a bad joke connection, Floyd19. Okay, misspoke, maybe inappropriate, take it back, clarify, apologize, move on. No. Within 24 hours, Reebok dropped its contract with CrossFit. Gyms across the country dropped their relationships with CrossFit. And the founder of CrossFit resigned within 24 hours and immediately said, I misspoke. I'm ashamed of myself. I take it all back. I should never have said it. I should never have thought it. It's the whole thing. Not just that you made a mistake, but you should never have made the mistake. You should have known better. You should be re-educated to understand better. But he didn't really need re-educating. He knew exactly what he was saying. And he could say, okay, it's probably inappropriate to say it that way. But I said it. Didn't mean it the way you think. Nope. Canceled. The New York Times runs an op-ed that Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican, argues that as a last resort, we should consider letting the military come in to quell down riots and looting if the states can't take care of it, if the police forces can't take care of it. The New York Times runs the op-ed, gets immediate backlash from within its own community, within its own staff. Within days, James Bennett, the editor of the op-ed page, resigns. He, by the way, is the brother of Senator Bennett from Colorado, who ran for president this year. He resigns, and the paper says, we were wrong to publish that op-ed. It did not follow our journalistic practices and standards. We shouldn't have published it. It advocated violence and was racist. And okay, did you read the op-ed? The senator calls for, as a last resort, the use of military to quell the protests if they get too violent and too much looting. Now, you can disagree with that. I don't think that's the solution. I think the National Guard was appropriate, but you can disagree. But it's certainly a valid viewpoint to have if articulated thoughtfully as a last resort. If we can't keep order, we can use the military to do that. That's not advocating violence and military against the protesters, but the New York Times went with, we pulled it down because he advocated using the military on the protesters. It's as if he was saying, bring the military out and shoot at the protesters, period. No, which he wasn't saying at all. But they pulled it down and they said we should never have published it. And we never will, despite the fact that they published his op-eds by ISIS and stuff like that. Well, that's not advocating terrorism or violence. It was just not the politically correct thing to say. Okay, it gets worse. All right, here we go. The last couple ones. And these get really built to where I'm going with this. Bar owner in Alabama tweets in a text, actually, to a coworker and a co-owner that he's pissed that the protests have shut his bar hours down. It's hard enough, he says, and he thinks George Floyd was a thug, and he thinks the protesters are idiots. Now, you can argue whether George Floyd didn't deserve to die. Doesn't matter what his criminal record was. I don't care how bad it was. But people have pointed out he has a criminal record, a criminal past. That's fine. Allowed to have that. You're still allowed to live your life and be given a second chance, and you certainly don't deserve to die. Certainly shouldn't die in custody on the street for a $20 counterfeit bill. But you could also say, I don't like the guy's character and I think he's a thug. Okay, I can disagree. You can say, I think the protesters are idiots. Okay, I can disagree. But people didn't just disagree. Candace Owens, who's a conservative Black commentator, started a GoFundMe to help him rebuild his business and raise $200,000, at which point GoFundMe canceled her campaign, saying, we can't have campaigns that support racist ideologies or promote violence. How is it a racist ideology to say you think someone's a thug and you think the protesters are idiots? You may not agree with it. But you're entitled to that opinion. It's not advocating violence. It's not racist per se. Whether this guy is a racist or not, I have no idea, but GoFundMe cancels the campaign based on that, which tells you all our social media platforms, even the ones you think are open use, aren't. They're being driven by the same thought process. Terry Crews, the actor, and he's Black, and he's been very outspoken around Black Lives Matter stuff. He writes, defeating white supremacy without white people creates black supremacy. Equality is the truth. Like it or not, we're in this together. For that tweet, he gets blasted. People saying there is no black supremacy. You can't say there's black supremacy. Terry Owens had said the few days before, I could be George Floyd. If you look at a picture of Terry Owens, he looks kind of like George Floyd. It's like, I could be George Floyd. My heart breaks. I could be that guy. And yet when he said, we all need to work together, defeating white supremacy without white people, meaning you need white people on board, creates black supremacy, he got hammered. Clemson's head football coach, wearing a shirt that says football matters, got hammered. He'd been wearing the shirt for months. It was something they gave out as a promotional thing. His quarterback was defensive end who's been all over on Black Lives Matter. says, you know, he wears it all the time. And he says, I didn't mean to say it. It had nothing to do with anything. I just, leads to another controversy with Clemson, which is that the one of their coaches, strength conditioning coach, one of the guys about 2 years ago apparently used the N-word. He used the N-word, according to the reports of what happened, telling a player who would use the N-word to not use the N-word. We don't use that word against another player, but he repeated the word. And for that, he got blasted today. And he had to take it back and say, I never should have used the word. I should have known better. Again, you could say, okay, it was a mistake, but the whole thing, I should have known. Why should he have known better? He used the word to say, don't use that word to call it. We don't do that. You don't call him a that. But he used the word. Okay, better. I won't do that again. But no, instead it was the re-education, I have to learn. I have to know better. The best one of this, and my last one, is Drew Brees. Drew Brees said he didn't support people kneeling during the national anthem. As much as he supports Black Lives Matter, and he and his wife have been active supporters, big supporters. They've done a lot around COVID. They've given $5 million like a month ago to people in need and charities helping people in need. They've been very outspoken about, living their lives, trying to create a better world. She's talked about, raising their kids to be without prejudice, to learn to love all people, all this stuff. Reading Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman and Malcolm X. But he says, I support Black Lives Matter. I just don't agree with kneeling in front of the flag. I can't support that. He had to walk that back 750 miles. And literally people blew up. People went crazy. How could he say that? How could he say that? How could he not support kneeling in front of the flag? And he said, because I think it's the wrong way to protest, to support the movement. Wrong way. Wasn't okay. Wasn't acceptable. And he walked it back, and his wife walked it back. And his wife wrote a long post in which she said, we are the problem, and we need to learn better. We need to be re-educated. We need to understand. And I'm going, wait a minute. You don't need to learn anything. You're doing fine. You're doing your best. What's wrong? If people are doing their best, isn't that enough? You have to take your view back? Do you have to say I was wrong and I should never have thought it? That's what's crazy. So one last one that someone said, referring to the protesters and again around the national flag, that they were ignorant, that the protesters were dumb and disrespectful. The protesters themselves were dumb and disrespectful for kneeling in front of the flag. Well, that's way past Drew Brees. So can you imagine what happened to this person? Nothing. That person was Justice Ruth Ginsburg. Yeah, Justice Ginsburg, the left's icon, the progressive icon, the woman who's holding the Supreme Court together from the evil Donald Trump. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, you can look it up in 2016, that people kneeling in the protest for the national anthem were dumb and disrespectful. Well, 3 years, there's no term limits on being canceled, because we got people getting canceled for things they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So Ruth Bader needs to be canceled if you guys are going to be consistent. You need to shut her down. She should resign her place in the Supreme Court. She should issue an apology. She should talk about how she needs to be re-educated, and she apologizes for ever thinking it was okay to think people who protested kneeling in front of the flag were dumb or disrespectful. But that won't happen, because cancel culture only works on the people that the cancelers want to cancel. They won't cancel their own any more than they won't make the governor of Virginia, who dressed in blackface in college, and there's pictures of it, and he's admitted it, won't make him resign because they like him. So cancel culture doesn't go both ways. But here's the really messed up thing. We're not going to solve anything if we just keep canceling people. Now, I'm not saying what happened in this whole mess was right, but I've got some interesting concluding thoughts on this. But first, I want to take us down video lane. And anybody who's got comments, we want to hear them. But Bruce and I gathered some pretty cool stuff, because in the middle of these protests, I want to look at what people were talking about. Because if you were saying, I'm in support the protesters, but I don't support what happened in some of those protests, take a look at this. This is a group of guys I'm talking to in the middle of Beverly Hills, protests, riots, looting. About looting. Check out what they say.
Holy crap.
Is this making a difference? You think it's making a difference? Yeah. You think so? Yeah. Well, here's what we call it, so we gotta make noise. Every call has a reaction. And what about the looting? Does that help or not? Yeah, we going crazy. That's how y'all built the country. No, killing's wrong. Hey, dude, the killing is totally wrong. But I'm saying, does the looting help? The answer is yeah. It's satisfying, bro. It's satisfying. And it's satisfying why? Because it's like payback? Like you killed someone, we're taking something from you.
Sometimes violence is the answer. He recruited. That's all I'm gonna say to it. Hey, that's what we did in the Middle East.
But what about violence against people's stores, even in their own communities? Does that make sense?
Collateral damage.
Wow. Bruce, collateral damage, right? Remember that? It's pretty stunning.
Yeah, even the scenery was pretty crazy. Right.
Yeah, you reacted to it because it wasn't a peaceful protest. And I'm not defending the police in this. It was the last thing I'm going to do right now is get into this defending the police, not defending the police. Although I think defunding the police is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. But these people were actually defending looting, saying it makes total sense. Yes, it's payback. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I don't agree that it's appropriate. It does get attention, but the wrong kind of attention. So if somebody wants to say, I think that's offensive or destructive, they're allowed to say that, but not in the cancel culture mindset. You're not. But what if somebody you wouldn't think said that? This is right as a store is being looted, and I go in to try to get the looters. Check it out.
But here's a Pampa store, a furniture store. And this is, unfortunately, here we go. We got people walking in. Looks like they're going to loot right now. All right, dude. I'm going in the store here. Dude. They're looting. What's the benefit of that? I tried to get to them. They set off the alarms.
They're a little worried for their safety, so there's only so much I can do. I hope they'll be here soon.
Right, because there's not stuff in
well,
there. People
and the lady is just as outraged about what's going on. That's the part that's
with her store or with this. With this.
She's in agreement.
Well, and
even when I spoke with her, she wasn't angry. She wasn't even angry. She wasn't angry because she says she's hurt and she understands it. And sometimes things have to happen, which is
all right.
To me,
that's a big heart.
That is a big heart.
That is
so
bigger than most people.
That's more than.
That's a big deal.
That is
owner of this store saying
to be that way.
Look, and you're also a black woman, so I don't know if your friend who owns it, right? But I'm sure people are like, well, why are you being the police on this situation, right? But it's not about that.
It's not about that. It's about right and wrong. We are out here because we are sick and tired of being killed. Our sons, our fathers, our uncles, our brothers, our nephews, our spouses are dying, and we're sick of it. But there's a difference. I lived through the riots. I grew up in LA. So I saw what happened in those businesses. A lot of them were black-owned businesses, were never able to recover. And so right is wrong and wrong is right.
So, there you have it. Again, we react differently depending on who's saying it. So if a black woman's saying it, or if Terry Crew is saying it, who's black, you'll get criticized, but you won't get canceled. But the reality is you shouldn't have a view because you're white or black. You should have a view, period, about what is right and wrong. And the problem with cancel culture isn't that people shouldn't be silenced or shut down by a louder voice by people who disagree with something someone says. It's that if you say something, it's the very right to have a view that isn't the correct view is taken away. I witnessed this when I was very young in China. I went to China before the wall came down in Berlin, but when China had a very limited access to Americans. And it fascinated me that so many people followed an ideology that Chairman Mao, who created communist China, had created, regardless of what he said. It could make no sense. They closed all they called it the Great Leap Forward, which was a great leap back. They shut down all universities, saying education was bad. People should just learn agrarian things. And they turned these beautiful universities into like farming places with stalls for animals. And I walked through them as they were trying to rebuild it. Whole generations of intellect were lost Famine destroyed millions of people's lives, but people just marched along. And whatever Chairman Mao said, that's what they agreed with. Kids would open the book, the little red book, and I remember a girl showed me the book she had as a kid, and it crossed out the leaders that Chairman Mao had said were no longer good people. I was like, how do people not think? Well, because I thought they have no access to information to show them a different view. But we live in a society where we do have access to information, where we can see other views. And in the cancel culture mindset, those views aren't being allowed. The most dangerous thing we can do is start telling people you can't have alternative views and you can't express those views. That's the one thing that will keep us going, is being able to allow alternative views, even ones we find really distasteful, to be heard, to be expressed, and to be argued out. And let the view that we don't like get smaller views or get more views. But saying you can't have the view, and when people have the view, taking it all back as if they suddenly woke up 5 minutes later and realized they've been so wrong their whole life about what they thought was so right. Sometimes that happens. People have a come to Jesus moment, no pun intended, but for the most part, they didn't think they were so wrong. They might have thought I mishandled that. In some cases, they might have thought it made total sense why I said what I said. But they have to go back and be ashamed of themselves for not knowing better, often 10 years before, and ask for forgiveness only to be canceled. Like, you're going to get canceled anyway. Might as well just stick to what you believe. But here's the thing that really, really is stunning to me. It is, if you think for a second that this will last, it won't, because we live in a cancel culture environment where people's attention spans are short. It's why COVID lasted, it'll come back, but literally day after day, it was the only news there was. Just like before that, the only news was the Russia and impeachment, which we forgot all about. And then it got replaced for 3 weeks with protests. And COVID didn't exist, even in the context of protests, except tiny little bit. This will pass. And if you think all the people taking your side and chanting for you and agreeing with you, if I'm a black person right now, it's great to see people are finally listening, because black lives do matter. And there clearly is a divide in our justice system. I went to law school. Trust me, it's been around. There is an inequality. There's a racial bias and an inequality in our justice system. No question about it. We have an economic divide between blacks and whites. Most inner city communities are more black and or color, not black like Latino, but mostly black than white. We have an economic divide. We have a cultural divide. We have a racial disparity around criminal justice, around all kinds of economic things. That's existed and needs to be addressed. And there are serious issues with police and police brutality in this country. No question. I've experienced them. I'm a white guy. I've experienced police behaving way beyond what they should be able to do, and just having to kind of sit there and take it. And I'm a white guy, so I get it. And I've worked in black communities. I've worked in inner cities. I've worked in gang prevention groups. I get it. It's not an even playing field. That all needs to be addressed. But if you think all these companies, everybody jumping on the bandwagon is the answer, it's not. Because that intolerance will simply create a silent majority of people who are resentful. And it will smash back. It will come pummeling back. It'll get Trump reelected, even though that seems almost impossible at times right now. And here's the final thing for all these people who are protesting, and everybody's putting up what they did and putting up how they did this. Everyone shows on their social, like, look at what I did. People have even faked it. Like, it's sad. But everybody wants to be, I said the right thing. I did the right thing. Black square, whatever it is on my Instagram. If you really think there is systemic inequality and injustice, what are you really willing to do about it? Because if you think it's really that bad, then you should give something up more than a little time. I mean, the truth is, our education and economic infrastructure is weighted disproportionately against black people. So, are you willing to open your business in an inner city community? How about this? Are you willing to hire a disproportionate number of black people in prison? Are you willing to hire a felon? Are you willing to guarantee your next hire will be a person of color, a black person who is an ex-con? How about you put your kids in the school in the inner city and or if you don't want to do that, you divert your school's resources to rebuild an inner city. Take your nice suburban school and have everybody divert all the resources to save 1 or 2 inner city schools. Give them the resources. How about you give up your job? All these companies, all these people on their high horses, all these celebrities. Why don't you give your job up you're in power to a black person so they can have that job. If you want to change racism systemically, you have to change both the systems, the levers, that's criminal justice reform, that's sentencing guidelines, that's economic investment, that's how we use resources. You have to change consciousness, but you also have to change the facts on the ground. The CEOs of all these big entertainment companies, all these big companies, Reebok and Disney, step down. Give your job to a black person. Put them in power. Not to hire more in your business. Give them your job. All these white, senators and Supreme Court justices, Ruth Ginsburg, like, step aside. Well, the Supreme Court, you can't because someone have to appoint you, but still you could resign and say, I'm resigning, fill my spot with a black person. I'm not kidding. People aren't going to really step up and do that because that would be a real sacrifice. It's easy to go out and protest. It's hard to actually make the change. And yet, if all we're going to do is cancel people who are well-intentioned in either trying to help with that change or perhaps aren't sure in fully why certain parts of it have to happen or disagree with aspects of it, like think police aren't all bad and maybe police brutality is a problem here, but not here, or we shouldn't put one side as the enemy, that white people aren't all bad, that people who would have a different view than the conventional thing can't express that, we're just going to cancel them? That's just going to divide. So I want to share one last video. This was one of the more inspiring things I saw in the last week.
You guys as guardsmen, and you have real guns versus like rubber bullet guns, people were much calmer with you guys here. Which you think intuitively, most people would be like, no, these guys are military, but people were like, no, these guys are looking out for us. One guardsman and a group of them on a truck in Hollywood made a cool point. They were like, we're all green. Like, we're all green. But I think that's kind of cool. A woman over there said to me, she's like, we all bleed red. It's 3 black women. And she's like, we all bleed red the same. Do you guys see it as a white guy and a black guy? Do you see a lot of racial tension within the Guard? I would
say definitely not in the Guard. We're all green.
Right.
Military's the biggest family in the world. Diverse backgrounds, different ethnicity.
So maybe we all need to think a little more like that.
I think opening minds and accepting that we are all Americans. We are all different.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
Fist bump over the barriers. Thank you. Take care.
That was an inspiring one, Bruce. I know it's a little hard to hear, but right? I mean, it was like the idea that we're all Americans and that the military was green. And, and I talked to a lot of black guardsmen and they had the same reaction. They could say, I support the protests, and so did white guardsmen. But at the end of the day, they could be, I'm a black man, but we're wearing green. And, we're unifying, we're coming together. And I feel like that coming together is more important than anything. And right now we're just dividing. Bruce, I know we're running out of time, but can we bring up like an audience comment?
Yeah, well, we have Igor. Let me go ahead and bring him up. Let me bring it up right there.
Oh, it's a big one. Go ahead. Let us know, Bruce.
Yep, we need to guarantee good schools for every American. It's not fair that poor neighborhoods have poor schools while rich neighborhoods have rich schools. It's just unfair to the kids. So he's looking for better education for America. This country deserves it.
Well, and I get it, right? I mean, you do. I mean, look, that's the reality. I grew up in a not great neighborhood in Milwaukee, and I went to a not great public school and was very integrated, very not intentionally per se, it just was. We're all different colors and all different income classes. But that's my point. We have rich communities and property taxes fund those schools. We don't have an equal education system. We don't. And it is disproportionate to those of lower income and those of color in most cases. But again, what are you going to sacrifice for it? Are you going to give up your kids good education? I always remember Bill Clinton, and every president sends their kids to the best private school in Washington, and then talks about, the Democratic presidents always talk about the need to integrate and have, better education. You're not going to send your kids. You're not sending your kids to the bad school, sending them to the best. Everyone wants what's best for them, for their little niche. That won't get us anywhere. That will just keep dividing us. We are all American, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. You can still recognize the problems, the disparities. But again, my question to people is, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? Talk is cheap. Black squares are cheap. And outrage at anybody who thinks the wrong thought is easy. Will you do the right thing? And will you do something that really would make a difference? Most people won't. Doesn't mean change won't happen. And it doesn't mean these protests aren't a necessary way to get to it. But we need to have a robust debate that looks at the whole picture. And people with the other side need to be able to say something. And again, otherwise, this will just eventually peter out, be canceled, and we'll be right back where we started. We won't see a lot of progress. So if you really want change, if you're a black person who's like, it's time to change, like that woman said to me, enough of the killing. Or if you're a white person who really wants change, well, it ain't going to happen if we just keep silencing people who are actually arguing whether we should or not. And we'll end it with the defunding the police, which is the extreme end of this. Minneapolis looks like it's going to defund its police department. That means there would be no police department. That's really your solution. You want to take all police away. Okay, because when you will be open season, you will have the purge every day. People will be, I can rob, kill, do whatever I want. No one will stop me. You know, homicides in LA went up 200% in the last week. That's with a police presence. People will just do whatever they want, and there'll be no police to come help you. You count on your neighbors. That's what you really want. That's reform. I mean, that's where we just divide. Reform is working together, hearing different voices, allowing dissenting opinions. That's what makes America America. We are all Americans. I'm Rob Nelson, something to think about.